Hello YouTube viewers, Pranam. Welcome to Dr.RAjeshverma's YouTube channel, and in this particular video I'll be talking about the factors affecting learning. Let us start with the definition of learning. Any relatively permanent change in behavior or behavioral pattern produced by the experience is known as learning. One more definition: learning is a long term change in mental representations or the associations as a result of experience. The third one is and simplest definition is the permanent modification in behavior due to experience or practice. So, dear viewers, dear learners, the most important point as far as learning is concerned is there is a modification in behavior, and that modification is lifelong, that is, it's permanent. And the modification or the change that occurs in learning when is due to when it occurs due to some experience or practice. In that case, that change is termed as the learning. I think it's clear to you. We'll be discussing certain factors. Before that, let us discuss some characteristics of learning. Because to discuss the factors or to understand the concept, this is my view that we must know the definition in clear-cut terms as well as the characteristics of that particular concept. So first one, learning, is a subjective phenomenon, and being a subjective one, it has certain characteristics. What are that characteristics? The first one is the learning involves some kinds of experiences. Without the experiences, without the practice, the learning is impossible. Learning is not feasible. Some kind of experience we must have to learn something. Second one is important. Learning is dependent upon the long-term memory. Though learning is some dependent upon the characteristics, or sorry, that experience, but long-term memory are also have some significant role in the learning. The third one is the ensuing behavioral changes on account of experience are permanent. That is, the experiences or the practice through which there is a change in the human behavior or the animal behavior. That change is permanent one, that is lifelong. If that change is permanent one or the lifelong, only in that case we term that it is a kind of learning. And the fourth one is very important one. Learning is the result of sequence of interrelated events. When you learn something, when you experience something, there is the chain of events occurs, and that chain means their all events are interrelated. So due to that interrelation between the events, learning occurs. Then the fifth is the learning is an inferred process. We do not learn the whole process. Exact thing we do not learn. If there is some event occurring or some other there is a phenomena, we do not learn each and every aspect of that event. What we learn is the what has been inferred from that phenomena or that event, because that ensures, that creates the experience in you, that changes your behavior permanently, not the whole process. We may learn the important points of that process or the important events, important the timing of that process, but we never remember, we never can keep all these things, all the all minute details of that process in a long-term memory, and then finally lead to an inferring the outcome of that process, and that outcome leads to the experience or the practice, and that experience due to that practice, that is known as the learning. And the last one is the learning occurs in three basic forms. Classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and observational learning. Sometimes Gestalt school of thought also adds that learning occurs due to insight also. So dear friends, these are the six characteristics of learning. Now, what are the factors affecting learning? So we'll be discussing almost four type of factors. First one is the factors affecting classical conditioning. Then the factors affecting the operant conditioning, factors affecting the observational learning, and general factors that affect the your learning process. Now, by this time, you must aware, you must know what is learning. Again, I repeat, learning is the permanent change in behavior by virtue of practice or experience. So you must remember this punchline of learning. Now let us discuss each type of factors in little bit of detail. The first one, classical conditioning factors. You know, classical conditioning is a very important form of learning given by the Ivan Pavlov, the Russian physiologist. According to that classical conditioning, the first one, the factor that affects the learning is the temporal arrangement of conditioned stimulus and unconditioned stimulus pairing. That is the timing between the presentation of conditioned stimulus and unconditioned stimulus. So this is the very important one. This affects the whether that the temporal arrangement between CS and UCS decides whether learning occurs or not. You know, conditioned stimulus and unconditioned stimulus. If you remember the Ivan Pavlov's dog experiment, the conditioned stimulus in that case was the bell and unconditioned stimulus was the meat powder. So arrangement between these two is a very important for the learning to occur. So we'll discuss these things when we discuss the classical conditioning in a little bit more detail. The second factor that affects the classical conditioning is the intensity of CS and UCS. So the strength, intensity means the strength of the CS or the unconditioned stimulus. So in case of Ivan Pavlov's experiment, the sound of the bell is the intensity of the conditioned stimulus. The quantity of the food, milk, or that is meat powder, is the strength or the intensity of the UCS. It has been observed that higher the intensity of the CS or UCS, better will be learning or conditioning. So this is the very important factor that affects the classical conditioning. The third one, physical settings in which the CS and UCS are presented. That means the immediate environment, immediate settings are very, very important that affects the classical conditioning or learning. The fourth one is the time gap between the present and the fifth one, the familiarity of the stimuli. If the individual or the animal or the organism is familiar with the stimulus, in that case, the classical or the conditioning or the learning occurs rapidly. And familiarity delays the conditioning or the learning. And the sixth factor that affects the classical conditioning is the type of conditioned stimuli. The conditioned stimuli, the type is also important. Whether that stimuli is appetitive one or the aversive one. The appetitive one, in case of the stimuli is appetitive one, that conditioning is rapid, quick, and for the long term. Whereas if it is aversive one, that also for the long term, but it takes a little bit of time or may not. That also affects the the learning process. So my dear viewers and dear friends, these are the 6 characteristics or the factors that affect the learning, particularly the classical conditioning. Then comes the operant conditioning factors, means the factors that affect the operant conditioning. You know, operant conditioning was given by B.F. Skinner, the radical behaviorist, generally we call it. So, what are the factors? He gave various new terms, defined and behavior in terms of operant conditioning. The first one is the important factor reinforces. He gave the term reinforcement. So reinforces of both types. Whether the reinforcement that is given to the individual or the organism is a primary one or the conditioned one. The primary reinforces are the that satisfies our biological needs. That's the food, water, etc., air. So these are the primary reinforcers. So it depends upon the primary or the conditioned responses to occurs the learning. So these are very important factor. Second one is the schedule of reinforcement, the occasion on which reinforcement will be given. You know what is the schedule? Schedule means there is a time gap. Sometimes the number of after the number of trials that individual is presented, organism presented with the reinforcement. So that's also important. Sometimes it's a variable ratio schedule, that is fixed ratio schedule, various variable temporal schedule, time schedule. So this interval schedule, that is all the fixed interval schedule. So this is the schedule of the reinforcement. we'll be discussing the schedule of reinforcement in when we discuss the operant conditioning. Right now, you to know this much that schedule of reinforcement is also a very important one for affecting the operant conditioning. Then comes the delay of rewards. It's a very important one. Either it will be impulsive and procrastinators. If the reward, there is a delay in the reward, that also significantly affects the operant conditioning. If the reward is given just after the your response, in that case the conditioning occurs a little bit faster. Whereas if the reward, there is a delay in the reward, that time the conditioning takes time. So this is a very important factor, that is timing of presentation of reward or the delay of rewards. The fourth one, biological makeup or the instinctive drift. So it's a very technical factor that affects the operant conditioning. What is that? A tendency to return to type of behavior expressed under natural conditions. Sometimes when organisms, various individuals, they try to manifest their behavior as per their instinctive drift or their genetic blueprint or their biological makeup. So due to that also the individual is affected by these factors. That is the operant conditioning affected by the your biological makeup also, your instinctive drift also, your that is genetic makeup also. So what is that? Means we are tend to, by virtue of our biological makeup, we are tend to behave in particular way under natural conditions. In that, when we are in laboratory, in that case too, we are oriented, we are tending to behave in as our biological makeup or the genetic blueprint forces us to do. So that is also an important factor. Means the similar experiment has been done in rats. Some same if you do in the pigeons or some fishes. So they all have their own genetic blueprint. They have their own biological makeup. So they have their own type of behavior under natural conditions. So in laboratory also, when you put up these animals under the testing conditions, they tend to behave as per their biological makeup. Could you get me? So this is the important factor, the biological makeup or the instinctive drift. And the last factor that affects the cognitive, that is the operant conditioning, the cognitive factors, such as the cognitive map or the mental representation. For that, you need to understand and to read the Tolman and Honzik's experiment. So it's a beautiful experiment. This graph represents the outcome or the results of that experiment. There are the three linings, three curves types. So you see in the first one, you see a yellow one. These, the rats who were, the results of that yellow line is that they were continuously reinforced after each trial. And in the case of blue one, they were not reinforced, they were not given any reinforcement up to 10 days, but they were reinforced after 11th day. Whereas in the red line case, these rats were never reinforced. So you will find in the at x-axis there is number of days, and the y-axis there is average number of errors. It's a dramatic experiment. Dramatically, you see that in the blue line, it's after the 10th day when the rats were presented with the reinforcement, the number of errors drastically reduced, even lesser than the rats who were conditionally fed. So this is a very important one. The outcome of that, the interpretation of that result was that Tolman and Honzik, they suggested that these rats, they created a cognitive map in their brain, and due to that learning occurs. So this is very important one. I'll repeat once again, cognitive factors such as cognitive map or the mental representation of the that phenomena or the event, and that impacts the learning significantly as suggested by the Tolman and Honzik experiment. So dear friends, these were the two operant conditioning factors, and the next comes the observational learning, that is given by the Albert Bandura. The first one is the attention. What is that? The extent to which focus is on the behavior of others. When we observe others doing something, so we try to put our focus or we try to attend to them, and due to that we learn something. This is very important one because children learn more with observation. What their role models, what their parents, what their family members are doing. They just observe and then they put that observation or that behavior into practice. So it's a very important one. The first one is the attention. The second is the retention. Retention of the observation, what they have observed from that to retain in your long-term memory. So it's a very important one. The ability to retain or memorize the information gained from observing others' behavior is known as retention. The third factor, production process. You know attention, then retention, and finally the production process. What is that? The ability to behave in accordance with the retained information. The information, by virtue of attention, we retain some information by observing others, and by that observation, that retention or the information is retained in our long-term memory. According to that long-term memory or that our retained information, we try to produce it, we try to show it through our behavior. So that is known as the production process. The fourth one is the motivation, the purpose and utility of the information. When we observe some individual, we try to gain something, that whether that information we are observing is for there is some utility for that for us. If there is utility, if there is some purpose for that, only in that case we try to retain that information, and that comes under the purview of the motivation. So if there is no motivation, there is no learning. Getting my point? Next one, role models. I discussed this thing in previous videos also. The role models are very important. There may be your family members, your parents, your teachers, or someone else on your village. So the individuals whose behavior outcomes influence the observer's behavior. If your behavior is influenced by the some individual, let it be your teacher, let it be your parents, family members, your mother or father, means if your behavior is influenced by someone, in that case we'll call them as a role models, because this is a very important one in society and in family too. So the next factor were the general factors. First one is the motivation. We to discuss the what is the motivation. That is the psychological guiding force that drive an individual towards the goal. You have set certain goals in your life, and certain goals you have set, but there are various goals in your lives too. Suppose you are hungry. In that case, what is your immediate goal? To get some food. This means who drives you to get the food? That is the motivation. So very important. If there is no motivation, there is no learning. Then comes the attention. I discussed it within the previous that observation learning this also. Then what is the attention? Is the maintaining focus on particular object, particular individual, or particular event. That is the attention. If you have attention, you have a better learning. Then comes the preparedness. Preparedness means readiness to deal with the situations and the stimuli. That readiness may be your psychological one, your physiological one. That has to be one. So if you are prepared to learn something, in that case, your learning will occur rapidly. If you are not prepared one, that learning takes time. But if you are continuously fed the information and if you are not prepared one, in that case, it takes a little bit of time. For example, when you are sitting in a classroom, right now when you are watching my video, if you are prepared, mentally prepared or physically prepared to learn, in that case your learning will be faster and rapid. But if you are forced to show or this video, forced to see this video, in that case it take little bit of more time to learn the concept discussed in this video. Then comes the psychological health. What is that? State of psychological well-being or fitness. If you are psychologically fit, if you are mentally healthy, in that case learning occurs faster. Individuals who are found to be lacking in psychological health take more time to learn the same concept in comparison to individuals who are psychologically healthy. Then comes the physiological health. It's a very important one. That is your state of fitness, physical fitness. If you are not fit, suppose you are suffering from some disease, physiological disease or infirmity, in that case it will take more time for you to learn something, because you're suffering from fever, high fever. And if I ask you to watch this video, will you be able to retain the information? No, because you are not well, you are not physiologically healthy. So my dear friends, these are the 5 factors that is important for the learning. The sixth one is the intellectual ability. What is that? The cognitive ability to deal with the challenges thrown upon by the life. At every step, life offers you various challenges and the problems. So to deal with these problems and challenges, we need to have the cognitive ability, that is known as the intellectual ability. People with feeble-mindedness, people with retarded intellectual ability take more time to learn a concept than the individual with average or more than average intellectual ability. The individual suffering from mental retardation, they take bit of long time to remember or to learn a concept or a phenomena or an event or some activity. So intellectual ability is a very important factor that affects the learning. Then comes the interest. If you are interested in some phenomena, if you are interested in some event to learn some subject or something new concept, that time you learn it better. So what is that interest? Means emotional response of liking towards an object or event. If you are emotionally oriented towards an object or an event, in that case learning occurs faster. If you do not show an interest, such time you see various students sitting in the classroom, they do not show an interest in the teachers, what teacher is telling to them, talking to them. So they do not respond to the teacher. In that case, the learning in that case is very slow or almost nil. So important factor in the learning is the interest, and interest means your emotional orientation towards the object or an event or an discipline. Then comes the maturity, the level of maturity. Maturity is also type of an experience. So there's a little bit of big difference between experience and maturity, but you can understand the maturity in terms of experience. The people who are more mature, mature in terms of their age, mature in terms of their psychological health, psychological system, cognitive ability. If they are more mature means that if their maturity level is up to a normal level or up to their age factor, then this means their learning ability or retention ability is a little bit faster. So what is maturity? Psychophysical changes due to growth and development. So if you are mature enough, your learning ability is faster. You can take an experiment. If you want to your child, 5-year-old child, you want to see that child learns the how to tie the shoelaces. He or she take a little bit more time than if you want to teach that same process to an individual with a child with 11 or 12 years of age. So what is that? The difference is maturity. That is the due to the growth and development factors. Then comes the biological needs. Suppose you are, first I'll let you know what are the biological needs. Physiological deficiency that drive an individual's behavior. What are the biological needs? Hunger, thirst, or sex. These are the very three important biological needs. So these needs also significantly influence the learning. If you are hungry, you will try for, your goal will be to get some food. In that case, suppose you are thrown in a jungle and you don't have any food to eat. In that case, your goal is to just to acquire something to eat, and that time your learning will be, for your aim will be to get some food. The learning will be rapid there because you'll try to use your experience, your long-term memory. So if you are not hungry, suppose you'll keep sitting or relaxing doing something else. So biological needs also significantly influence the learning. And you know what are the biological needs? Physiological deficiency that drive an individual's behavior. So my dear friends, my dear viewers, YouTube viewers, these are my references. You can always cross check them, and if you want to study more, you can refer these books. And apart from that, there are other books also that defines the factors that affect the learning. So in this video, we have discussed the four factors that affect the classical conditioning, operant conditioning, observational learning, and the general factors. Before that, we discussed the characteristics of learning and the definitions of learning. My dear friends, next we are going to discuss the trial and error learning. Before that, if you like this video, if you love it, if you have something to say, you can write my comment box or you can email me at varmasujit@yahoo.com. But remember, if you like it, share with others. But if you have something to say, if you dislike it, you kindly share with me because I always appreciate your comments. Once for that, my dear friends, thank you for watching this video.